Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 6th of November here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Donald Trump tells supporters he will deliver a golden age as he closes in on victory over Kamala Harris in the US presidential race.
The Republican candidate has been declared the winner in Pennsylvania, North Carolina and Georgia, as world leaders offer Trump their congratulations.
The dollar, Wall Street futures and Treasury yields surge on Trump's rising presidential prospects as the Republicans also secure a majority in the Senate.
And emerging market currencies tumble on concerns over Trump's trade policies. Donald Trump is on the cusp of winning a second term as US president. The Republican candidate has claimed victory after TV networks projected he won the pivotal swing state of Pennsylvania. Donald Trump currently has 267 electoral college votes, while Kamala Harris is on 224. The Republicans are also projected to have won control of the US Senate. The dollar, stock futures and bond yields have surged in reaction. Donald Trump has been speaking in the last couple of hours to supporters in West Palm Beach in Florida.
We're going to fix everything about our country, and we made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. It is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
Trump has not yet been declared the winner by most news outlets. However, he has been projected to win Pennsylvania, Georgia and North Carolina, key states, puncturing Democrats' hopes and all but ending Democratic nominee Kamala Harris's hopes of mounting any comeback.
Let's just bring you up to date on some of the states where results haven't been called yet. In Wisconsin, we are looking at, with 93% of votes counted, Donald Trump leading 51% to 47% for Kamala Harris.
And in Michigan, with 86% of votes counted, Donald Trump is projected to have won 51.4%. Kamala Harris is on 46.9% of the Michigan vote.
And in Arizona, with 53% of votes counted, Donald Trump leading with 50.8% of the votes counted, Kamala Harris on 48.3%.
Now, if the election does end in a Trump win, it will have major implications for the global economy. The Republican has pledged to improve the US economy and also levy a 20% tariff on all imports. Trump told his supporters that he was going to bring down taxes.
We're going to be paying down debt. We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have.
Donald Trump speaking there at his results event in Florida. Bloomberg Economics says that a Trump White House would likely spend more and could raise borrowing costs all around the world.
Republicans have gained control of the US Senate. Right now, Democrats have 42 seats, the Republicans 51, with the remaining seats left to be called. Democrats faced a series of difficult races, defending 3 seats in states Donald Trump won in both 2016 and 2020. Here's Bloomberg's Joe Matthew with a breakdown of how the Republicans did it.
This is not a big surprise after the motion that we have seen so far in the states tonight. All they needed were 2. We told you that in the outset. Pretty easy to do the math here. It came from West Virginia, Jim Justice winning the Senate seat there held by Joe Manchin, and Ohio, Sherrod Brown losing to Republican Bernie Moreno. That's what we have here. That's how tight the margin is.
Joe Matthew points out that no Senate Republicans were up for re-election in states that Joe Biden carried in 2020. In the House, the Democrats currently have 173 seats, the Republicans 193, with counting ongoing.
Markets are reacting to Donald Trump's rising presidential prospects at just after 9 a.m. London time. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is stronger 1.2%, with the greenback surging against all major currency pairs. S&P 500 E-mini futures are climbing 2.2%. 10-year US Treasury yields have surged now 14 basis points higher at 4.41. Many investors see Trump's pro-growth stance on industrial policy, corporate tax cuts and tariffs boosting stocks and fueling inflation, and therefore keeping interest rates elevated. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta says the dollar move has international implications.
What I think is shocking here is that the stock market is rallying in the U.S. from the futures perspective in line with the dollar. And that's an inverse correlation that really matters for international investors, because the more expensive the dollar gets, the harder it is to access the S&P 500. And that's why this move in the dollar is so crucial.
Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta speaking there. The Mexican peso, the emerging market currency most sensitive to a Donald Trump win, has tumbled this morning. So too is the euro and the yen, along with Eastern European currencies. Meanwhile, oil prices are down 1.5%. Gold is down 0.7%. And Bitcoin, again, a favoured Trump trade, has surged by 6.6% this hour.
The world leaders have been reacting to Trump's likely victory. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that he looks forward to working with Trump in the years ahead and that he knows the UK-US special relationship will continue to prosper. French President Emmanuel Macron congratulated Trump, adding, "Ready to work together as we've done for years." Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed Trump for what he called history's greatest comeback, while Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban said Trump was on the way to a beautiful victory. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that he looks forward to an era of strong United States under Donald Trump. He's saying he continues to rely on strong bipartisan support for Ukraine.
And those are our top stories, all of the details around potentially Donald Trump on the cusp of winning a second term as US president. Now, let's bring in for a discussion on this our senior writer, Stephanie Baker. Good morning. It's been quite an extraordinary night, hasn't it? We weren't expecting to get the results so quickly. Donald Trump coming out this morning addressing his cheering supporters. What do you make of the results so far? What did the polls get so wrong?
Right. So technically, this is not a polling error. All the polls were saying it was a dead heat, but most of the races were within the polling margin of error. Having said that, there were some polls that got it very wrong. Michigan, for one, Trump has won by a much wider margin than any polls I had seen. There were some recent polls just in the past week, the New York Times Siena poll, the Marist NPR poll that showed Kamala with momentum pulling ahead, including in the battleground states. So clearly the polling got some of this wrong, and it ended up more like 2020 than 2022, the midterms. I think there were some people that had thought that the polls were not capturing the amount of anger amongst women voters about the abortion ruling from the Supreme Court, and that they would turn out in huge numbers for Kamala Harris. That didn't pan out. And what we got instead was polls continued to undercount Trump supporters. And I think that's been a historic problem. We saw it in 2016. We saw it in 2020. 2022 was not the model for this one.
And just on Michigan, as the votes there, we've just got 87% of votes counted and Donald Trump leading 51% to 47%. Counting still ongoing there. We haven't called that race just yet. But I do want to look at kind of the picture outside of the presidential race as well, because you've got Republicans now in control of the Senate, the House. We're still waiting for the full picture to emerge. What does that look like for a political landscape from January?
I think a lot really depends on the House, and that's too early to call. I think it's too tight. I think some Democrats think they still have a chance of holding on and regaining control there. But I think if the Republicans win the House, that means Trump has a clean sweep, House, Senate, White House, and a very friendly Supreme Court. So there's no friction. There's nothing stopping him from doing what he wants to do.
On the Bloomberg terminal this morning, we have all of our reporters who've been staying up overnight, chipping in and putting their points across. And one of them that I thought was interesting was a line about how Trump supporters, many are now jostling for the thousands of positions that are going to be open. And former President Trump talking about delivering on the promises that he made during the election campaign. What do you think the key policies are going to be from Trump to bring in if he does win the White House? What do you think the most speedy policy enactments will be?
Well, remember, he has promised some major economic changes, sweeping tariffs. There's some debate as to how much power he has to do that unilaterally. Technically, under the Constitution, Congress has that ability, but he has executive authority under various other statutes to do that if he wants to. Then there is his promise to begin mass deportations on day one. And I think he does have a fair degree of, latitude to go ahead and do that. Isolationist foreign policy. He has vowed to end the war between Ukraine and Russia in a day. I expect he will go ahead and do that. It looks very unlikely that Ukraine will continue to get aid from the United States with a Republican-dominated Senate and a White House controlled by Trump and J.D. Vance, who have been very negative about support for Ukraine. So I think it looks both very isolationist and, frankly, inflationary.
Stephanie, you've written a book on punishing Putin and the economic war that's taken place since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. I wonder how you view a Donald Trump in the White House and relationships with Russia.
I think Trump is not a good. It's not a good move for Ukraine. I think this is going to be a very, very shaky time for Ukraine. Europe will have to step up in a big way, and I think the biggest problem is that they do not have the defense industrial base to continue to provide military aid to Ukraine. And I don't see, even if they step up financially, I don't see Europe raising enough finance and then placing orders with U.S. defense manufacturers. I don't think that's politically tenable. So I think it's going to be very difficult for Volodymyr Zelensky to hold on if he is forced to do a deal where he cedes control of territory to Russia and, they declare a ceasefire and a demilitarized zone. I think he will be under enormous political pressure domestically, and I'm not sure he can survive that.
Okay, so that's the point on Ukraine. Just sort of going back to the election results overall, what do you think the messages were from Trump that worked with US voters, or messages that failed from Harris to hit home with US voters? I think
the main takeaway from this election is that the polls got this one right. 75% of Americans thought the U.S. was on the wrong track. And when Trump posed this question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Everyone said no. Even though Biden had managed to roll out an economic recovery, a so-called soft landing, and inflation had come down, the fact of the matter is people go to the supermarkets and they're facing much higher bills because of post-COVID inflation. And, there's a real desire to go back to those pre-COVID times. And the ultimate irony is that a lot of the Trump policies that he's outlined are actually going to be adding to inflation rather than controlling inflation. I haven't seen anything he's done that would try to temper inflation, unlike some of the proposals that Harris had made.
Okay, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. That's Stephanie Baker, Bloomberg senior writer there. And if you're just joining us, to remind you that Donald Trump has claimed victory in the US presidential race, but as of yet, he only has 267 of the 270 electoral college votes needed to secure the presidency. But if he wins one more of the states that are still yet to be called, he will have crossed that threshold. Kamala Harris has 224 electoral college votes.
And the reaction in markets is to push up US stock futures, but even European stocks are actually gaining 1.9% this morning. So in order to discuss, let's bring in Bloomberg TV anchor Kriti Gupta for the latest on the market reaction. Kriti, stocks are up, the dollar's up, and you've seen US yields also up very significantly. Is this just a reaction to having a quick potential result, or what looks to be a fairly quick result, or is this backing for the Trump trade?
Let's do it asset class by asset class, because this is one of those moments where they're not all trading with the same narrative. I'll start with the equities picture here and just put some numbers on this rally that we're seeing. Dow futures are up 2.6%. S&P mini futures are up over 2%. I'll give you an even bigger number. Look at small cap futures. The Russell 2000 up a whopping 5.3% intraday trade. That is the biggest move to the upside in a single intraday period you have seen ever. in history. That's how big of a move small caps are seeing right now. Again, anything can shake out going into the U.S. Open, but this is something that has to do with positioning ahead of the election. So this was a question of we need an element of certainty. We got one fairly quickly, to your point. So there is a little bit of a sigh of relief. There's also one that suggests Donald Trump will have, from a policy perspective, a more markets-friendly approach. Less regulation, more tax cuts. That is all positive in terms of risk sentiment. And then lastly, this idea that there was kind of this idea that there would be a little bit of sell-off into the election and then a big rally anyway. So positioning was very much a part of it, regardless of which candidate won.
Critty, is that a broad sweep that we're seeing in terms of the stocks that are and sectors that are called higher? We're looking at Tesla. I just noted that at the top of the hour, the pre-market, that share jumped 12% in pre-market moves. But I'm wondering, because we are seeing a fairly broad markets lifted in Europe, but not all sectors.
Correct. Well, I'll start with the Tesla story, because you're right, it is up a whopping 13% in the pre-market. Remember, in Trump's initial remarks that he had made at the West Palm Beach Convention Center, he mentioned Tesla, he mentioned Starlink, he mentioned X. This is a big deal because Starlink specifically, of course, for those who aren't familiar, the satellite program that really enables communications in war zones, but has also helped with hurricane relief, was under some pressure in terms of funding from the Biden administration. So this was a big concern. Not to mention, Tesla itself has been a big beneficiary of Biden subsidies as well, some of the EV subsidies as well, but there was friction in that relationship. So this is something that you're seeing as, of course, one, that there has been this endorsement and friendship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but there's also the fact that he specifically mentioned Starlink, he mentioned X, he mentioned the several different kind of parts of Elon Musk's businesses that is showing up in Tesla, given it's the only part of the business that's publicly traded, to my knowledge, higher by about 13%. But when you mention other sectors as well, and I think when you look at some of the moves that you're seeing pre-market, the initial reaction is to look at some of the sectors that are more exposed to the South, aka his base. And I'm thinking of things like energy infrastructure, for example. That's where you're expected to see less regulation, but you're seeing that in consumer products as well. If you're thinking less tax cuts, that's more disposable income, that's more help for even retail companies as well. They will rally. If you look at kind of the downside movers in this morning's early trade, you're seeing it really show up in a lot of technology, a little bit of biotech. So that defensive trade is really one that's kind of being unwound from the last couple of months, really.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating that when you look at the worst performing stocks in Europe, you get a little hint of the kind of reflection of what you say about the Russell small cap stocks in the US. Maybe they're rallying because they think that a Trump White House will bring more business into the US or will help domestic businesses to grow. Orsted and Vestas Wind Systems obviously benefiting from, the switch to clean energy. AP Maersk, big in the trade, in trade and shipping, obviously also down significantly. Volvo Cars, again, down. Those are some hints about, even though the European stock market is up, that maybe there are some concerns there.
Absolutely. And the clean energy conversation is one that the Biden administration has pushed quite heavily and is a bigger investment thesis in Europe than it is in the United States, because it is expensive to invest in renewables, more expensive in the United States than it is in Europe. I'll bring your attention to the banks very quickly if I can, because that's where I think you're seeing a really interesting dynamic. If you look at the underperformers in Europe this morning, alongside some of the renewable companies you point out, it's the banks. And the reason for this is because of the yield move. So you're seeing American banks trade higher in the U.S. because, again, yields are going higher in the Treasury market. But in Europe, there's a massive bid for German bonds. There's a massive bid for European debt because there's an assumption that this will accelerate rate cuts from the ECB and the BOE. That's showing up in the underperformance of the bank.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.